Has Sean Payton fallen in love with a potential weapon for the Denver Broncos and Bo Nix? More and more mounting evidence seems to point toward that being the case. The Denver Nuggets failed to hold serve on their home court, evening the series at one game apiece before it heads to LA. How costly was last night's loss toward the Nuggets' chances of beating the Clippers in this first-round series? And the Colorado Avalanche, after losing an overtime heartbreaker to the Dallas Stars in Dallas, is it time for Jared Bednar to consider maybe making some changes on the blue line? All things to come in today's rundown, but we begin in the world of the NBA, where the Denver Nuggets, after a thrilling overtime victory in Game 1 against the Clippers, failed to maintain their home court advantage, splitting the series at one apiece as the Clippers take down Denver behind a Herculean effort from Kawhi Leonard, who had a vintage throwback performance on both ends of the court, similar to the way that we saw James Harden have an explosive performance in Game 1. There was a point in this game where Kawhi Leonard was shooting 90% from the field in the first half at 9 for 10, and it seemed like, as awkward as his shooting motion may look sometimes on television, there was no issue and no chance he wasn't finding the bottom of the net. It simply was not enough for the Nuggets, who I think actually responded well from an effort and energy enthusiasm standpoint for good stretches of the game. And they actually outshot the Clippers for good chunks of that game. But costly turnovers and miscues and lapses defensively just prevented the Nuggets from finally closing the door in a game that was back and forth and neck. The first player who was kind of on the call-out list was Michael Porter Jr., and we'll get into him later in his performance. But I would say the most controversial element of the game, which included a potential skirmish and fight between a struggling Norman Powell and an under-the-weather Jamal Murray that led to some chest bumping and some pre-fisticuffs threatening on the court. The most controversial moment in that game actually could be pinpointed to a decision from interim head coach David Adelman in the final possession, with the Nuggets having a chance to close out the game. David Adelman in the final seconds chooses not to call a timeout on the final possession. He chooses to let the guys play, in which Jamal and Jokic set up a two-man game, eventually swinging the ball to Christian Brown after a crash defensively that LA was making clear was part of their strategy as it relates to Nikola Jokic. Christian Brown misses a wide open three-pointer down three, and then a rebound to Jokic and an ill-advised rush shot and putback was unsuccessful, thus ending the game in regulation. David Adelman had an opportunity, in theory, to call a timeout there, as we've seen a lot of times in the NBA, when a coach in the final seconds wants to call a timeout, set up a run play from the sideline, and give a chance for a specific shooter to run. That's what I think a lot of people in the moment were thinking. But David Adelman, when asked about it after the game, he defended his choice. He said, quote, "Traditionally, they, being the Clippers, foul up three. Off the offensive rebound, my first instinct was to call a timeout. But then the ball went to Jokic." He went on to say that in that situation, he trusted his guys and decided to let them play. It didn't work out in this instance, but in David Adelman's defense, if Christian Brown hits that shot, there is no decision-making, hand-wringing toward the rationale. They tie the game in the final seconds. We're probably headed to overtime for a second straight possession, or a second straight game. And no one's the wiser. Christian Brown doesn't make the shot. It was actually a really bad shot, airballed short, and Jokic had to try to grab the rebound and make something out of it. And speaking of Nikola Jokic, he was asked about his thoughts on the final possession and how it flowed. And frankly, he had his interim head coach's back. He said, quote, "I think it was good, especially in those situations. If you can advance the ball, I think that's the right call." The Nuggets operate so smoothly when they're clicking in transition. And so I see the argument and the rationale, and I'll give David Adelman the interim benefit of the doubt in this. He has thus far, in his very short stint taking over for the winningest head coach in franchise history, seemed to have a pretty good pulse and read on not only the team and how they're feeling, but what they feel would be the most comfortable and best situation to move into going forward. And I do think that if Christian Braun makes that shot, which you could make an argument maybe he wasn't the right person or the ideal person to take that shot. He only finished with 5 points on the game, and he hadn't made a three-pointer all game up to that point before missing it and going 0 for 2 on the night from beyond the arc. So you could make an argument that maybe Jamal and or Jokic should have been the one taking that shot, perhaps even an Aaron Gordon, who had flirted with some production beyond the arc in the first 2 games. But that wasn't the open man, and that wasn't what the defense presented. And if there's one thing that we know about Nikola Jokic, the supercomputer processor that he is, dissecting the game play by play and possession by possession, he is going to find the path of least resistance and the open man and trust that person to take the shot. In this case, Christian Braun did not deliver like he has in previous stints this season. Michael Porter Jr., after a pretty abysmal and almost Houdini-like disappearing act in game 1, where he finished with low single digits in the points and rebounds column and was only recorded for 4 shots in the entirety of the game, which he went 1 for 4. He was called out by his head coach, David Adelman, after the game. And I feel like there's pretty strong evidence that that message was received. It took Michael Porter Jr. all of 9 minutes of the first quarter to eclipse his stat line from game 1 in the second game of this series. And while he maybe didn't have the quality of game that we've come to expect from him as one of the best pure shooters in the Western Conference and maybe highly ranked among the NBA as a whole when he's clicking, and the size mismatch that he presents, maybe he didn't have that level of production, but having a 15-point and 15-rebound game after getting called out by your head coach in a tight game that came down to the final possession, I think that's certainly a step in the right direction, if not a true comeback game for Michael Porter Jr. That being said, he did have a costly turnover at the end of the game that directly affected the Nuggets' ability to maintain the slight lead that they would have and keep control of the possession-to-possession switching toward the end of the game. And frankly, he blamed himself when he was asked in the locker room after the game. He said, quote, "I had the biggest one of the game. I feel like that's what lost it. I just had to tell my guys it's my fault, my mistake." Our own Jake Shapiro, who was on scene at the game and in the locker room interviewing the players, reported that Michael Porter Jr. went around to each player in the locker room individually to apologize to them for the costly turnover and the role that he feels it had in ultimately costing the Nuggets a pivotal game 2 before the series heads to LA. Jamal Murray, on the other hand, was not so singular in his blame. And ultimately, I think Jamal's opinion falls closer to the truth when he said it was basically everyone was at fault. And while that can seem like a cliche answer, when you have a game where you cough up the ball 20 times for 20 turnovers, giving the other team 21 points off those turnovers, and Nikola Jokic, as the best player in the world, misses 4 free throws, several of which in critical crunch time situations, there's more blame to be spread around other than Michael Porter Jr., who, unfortunately, appears to have suffered an injury, the severity of which is to be determined during that game. He said during the post-game interview that he was dealing with a shoulder joint sprain and that he had, quote, never felt pain like that before. His status for game 3 as of now is uncertain. I'm sure we will get an update as we get closer to tip-off of the next game and perhaps even at shoot-around before then. But if Michael Porter Jr. is not even available to be on the floor, it's one thing to have him available and you roll the dice and he's not the player or the productive caliber that you would like him to be. To have him not available at all actually puts the Nuggets in a pretty, I think, significant disadvantage with who they're going to have to lean on from the bench unit in Russell Westbrook and Peyton Watson for more minutes and more potential overexposure than they would before. So a little bit disconcerting, I think, for Michael Porter Jr., who, as our own Dante Gomez pointed out last night on DenverSports Tonight, and I agree with him, does seem to have a tendency when he comes across as checked out or lethargic or things like that, when he's called out publicly and aggressively, the way that Michael Malone had at times during this past season and in years past, the way David Adelman did at the closing of Game 1, essentially saying that Michael Porter Jr., if he's engaged and making plays on both ends of the courts, he'll be out there. And that sentiment being echoed by the center of the Nuggets universe, Nikola Jokic, when asked if there are ways he can think of to keep MPJ engaged, said, if you can't be engaged in the NBA playoffs, then you don't deserve to be playing this sport. So for MPJ to go from that abysmal Game 1 disappearing act to a 15-15 double-double game, and even albeit in a tight loss, only to have that momentum and potential progress derailed by another injury, I think that's going to be one that the Nuggets are going to have to juggle very carefully as they now head into a hostile road environment with a team that honestly might just be flat out better than them. Kawhi Leonard was unconscious in that game, and it felt like he had a hand in his face for a good chunk of the shots that he was making. He's just an electric shooter. Again, he's so tall and the trajectory is so straight line. But I felt like every single time the ball left the fingertips of Kawhi Harden or James Harden, Kawhi Leonard or James Harden, the snap of the net that came on the ensuing basket was so crisp that there was just zero doubt that it was going in. And that's a little bit daunting, I think, for a defense and a team in the Nuggets who struggled to play lockdown defense for good spurts of this season. So to a certain degree, there was like an element of defeatism with if Kawhi Leonard and James Harden have hands in their face and you're doing as best as you can to contest without fouling and it's not working, that's going to be a tough hill for the Nuggets to climb, especially with LA returning to their home environment. All right, it is time to head inside the action with our Colorado Avalanche, presented by Embers Living. Elevate your outdoor living with full luxury outdoor kitchens featuring Twin Eagle appliances. The Avalanche, like the Nuggets, lost in a heartbreaker. This one went to overtime. Colorado having a chance to really put their foot down on the Dallas Stars with a chance to steal both games in Dallas before the series returns to Colorado. And by and large, the script felt similar in the early goings, I would say the first two periods or so, to how Game 1 went. It was a tightly contested battle, but you felt like the Avs just had a little bit more of a push. And then in that third period, boy, did the script flipped on Jared Bednar and his crew, because that third period when they were down, they being the Stars, were down, and it felt like they came out with a little bit more desperation, a little bit more hunger, and they took the fight to Colorado in a way that unfortunately Colorado was unable to respond. You might look at the box score and see a 4-3 loss coming off of the game that Mackenzie Blackwood had in Game 1, where he basically stood on his head and was making acrobatic save after acrobatic save, and think that there was a significant drop-off between the pipes for the Avs. But I actually disagree with that. I thought Mackenzie Blackwood still played really, really well. Dallas was just throwing a lot at him. I think they struggled more on the blue line to keep the puck out of their zone. And Dallas was kind of cycling them to death and just putting Mackenzie Blackwood in a situation where he wasn't able to get comfortable. Plus, you have blockers and screeners crossing all over the place in front of him. He was getting bumped and hit a lot. They had to review a goal where Blackwood was essentially pushed back into his own net and just fighting to keep his pad in front of that back goal line to prevent a goal from being awarded to Dallas, kind of a greasy one that would have tied the game up at that time. Blackwood was asked about the eventual overtime goal after the game, and his explanation was pretty straightforward. He said, their guy cut through the slot and shot it. I kind of got bumped into. He came out of the corner really quick, and I was facing up ice, not to the post, so he beat me to the spot. And that final goal, that possession where Blackwell for the Dallas Stars was able to get a quality shot on Blackwood, who deflected it nicely, and the rebound dribbles just in front out of Blackwood's reach and kind of stops. And I think that was indicative of just some of the brutal ice conditions that the Stars and the Avs were playing on last night. And it was a little frustrating to me to watch. I mean, this is the Stanley Cup playoffs. This is playoff level hockey, and you can't have the ice in truly acceptable conditions. I know that in warmer climate states like we have in the South, it can be more difficult to maintain that. But I think Stanley Cup playoff teams and Stanley Cup playoff games deserve better quality ice than what both of those teams had to play on last night. But that puck just kind of dies right out of Blackwood's reach, and Blackwell is able to take what felt like 10 seconds, but was maybe only 2 or 3, is able to recognize, get his own rebound, and beat Mackenzie Blackwood on the position for the game-winning goal when the Colorado's defensemen, and frankly, some of their forwards in Miles Wood, were just completely out of position, couldn't find the puck, were unable to locate it, and it left Blackwood defenseless in a one-on-one situation where Blackwell for the Stars has all the momentum. So just a tough ending to a long, slogging overtime finish where you could tell both teams were just exhausted. And it was a little bit disheartening because of how hard that the Avalanche fought. And you knew the Dallas Stars were going to come at it with everything they had in this game, because the Avalanche stole game one and they were down late in the game into the third period. And this was desperation mode. And that's essentially how Jared Bednar described it when asked after the game about the shift in feel and energy from the second period into the third period. He said, I think the Dallas Stars, came out with a lot of desperation in the third period. We stopped skating out of our zone. We stopped skating out of our zone and making plays out of our zone. We mismanaged the puck in that third period and eventually into overtime. And he called out his team a little bit, saying he's going to need more. And it is also important to remember, and I think this is a good frame of reference, because there was definitely a feeling of defeat when the overtime goal from Blackwell went in, and the Avs end up losing the game to even the series. That just because the Avs are as good as they are and are playing as well and as in tune and fluid as they are, this is still the Stanley Cup playoffs, and the Dallas Stars are another 100-point contending team on the other side. They're going to have something to say about this too. So I think this was always a series that was destined to go 6 or more games, regardless of who was going to win it. And in order to do that, the home team is probably going to drop a game here or there. And we obviously hope that the Avalanche hold serve now that the series comes back to Colorado. But this was not a necessarily blown game the way that it felt like it was with the Denver Nuggets, where just some sloppy ball handling and defensive miscues compiled with a significant amount of turnovers and points off of turnovers for the Clippers just unraveled, and the game kind of melted away from them. This was a knockdown, drag-out, heavyweight fight between two really talented teams in the Dallas Stars and the Colorado Avalanche that just didn't go the Avs' way on a final break there, where your defensemen and your forwards that are kind of crowding the zone were unable to find the puck to clear the rebound out. And I guess we will see how they respond to this, but I do think that Jared Bednar may have to look at potentially making some shifts on the blue line for his team, particularly on that third defensive pairing where Eric Johnson, the Condor, who we know and love, he's a legend here for the tenure with which he played for the Colorado Avalanche before taking a brief respite elsewhere and re-signing at the deadline this season. He just looked slow. He just looked slow and old, and I think he was a little bit of a liability out there. And you're getting good contributions from your top two defensive pairings for the majority of their shifts. And honestly, offensively, you're definitely getting good looks, I think, from the majority of your bottom six, where actually your problem might be your second line pairing with Brock Nelson, a little bit of a disappearing act from Valeri Nichushkin, and Marty Necas. But with this game coming up that's returning to Colorado, I think Jared Bednar may have to look at making some adjustments. I think it might be time to sit EJ, and maybe you mix the pairings up a little bit. You move Sammy G up with Ryan Lindgren on your second pairing, and then you move big Josh Manson down on the third pairing with Malinsky, and just prevent EJ from being a little bit of a hole there. And it might be as easy as a plug and play, take EJ out and slide another player in. But I think mixing those lines and putting Lindgren and Sammy G and Manson and Malinsky together. I think that gives you a nice blend of not having two defensemen paired together that are overly offensive-minded and necessarily strictly defensive-minded defensemen. I think that gives you a little bit of a nice shakeup and a pairing to go underneath, obviously, Cale Makar and Devon Taves. The Avs, by and large, it's been a game of inches, so I don't think any drastic or major moves are necessary. I didn't think Marty Necas and Valeri Nichushkin had the best of games, and I think if you're going to compete with a deep and talented forward group like the Dallas Stars have, those two guys in particular, along with, the Arturi Lekkonens, the Nathan McKinnons, are really going to have to keep themselves on their toes to prevent things from getting too far out of hand one way or the other, because a team that builds a 2 or more goal lead because of how talented both of these two teams are, it's going to be hard for either side to come back from that. And obviously, Miles Wood was one of the people who was right in front of the final rebound goal that ended up being the overtime winner from Blackwell on the Stars. He was one of the more out-of-position players who had a chance to impact it and didn't. And the interesting discourse about that is that had Gabriel Landeskog played in this game like he was signed up to be, he was on the NHL's official pregame sheet on the official roster before getting pulled, despite warming up in pregame. Blackwood's the first one out on the ice, as traditionally the starting goaltender is, and right after that is Gabe Landeskog skating out onto the ice with all of the hype and the buildup about an injury to Ross Colton and what it would mean for the way they shake up the lines. Gabe Landeskog, obviously the likely replacement, who there was already whispers he was going to come back as early as Game 3, and this might just move the timeline up a little bit. Everything seemed to be on track. He goes out there. He's on the official NHL sheet. It's being reported. He goes out there for warmups, and then they scratch him. Bednar gave an explanation that Gabe wanted to get out there and get in the feel of it, and go through the warm-up process as he continues to ramp up for his return, but that almost as if it wasn't like a serious consideration that he was going to play. This was just a dress rehearsal kind of thing. And my response to that was, enough with the dog and pony show with this Gabe Landeskog thing. And I know he's filming a docuseries, and I know that that the NHL, who's responsible for creating those pregame lineups and printing out those sheets that get distributed by the media and the like, that's not made by the decision of the team. That's called by the NHL, even though final roster decisions right before puck drop are not made until very late in the process by the team. So that sets up an opportunity for conflict. What are we doing? Why was it necessary to go through all of that? And there's an argument to be made. I don't necessarily know if I agree with the argument, but there's an argument to be made that maybe Gabe Landeskog things fared differently in the game based on how he looked in Colorado and if he was ready to go. I don't necessarily disagree with that if he slotted in for Miles Wood. And, it's a little too fatalist to say, well, Gabe Landeskog would have cleared that puck and got that rebound. All I know is the roller coaster and the whirlwind and the drama element leading into a series that's already going to be a knockdown, drag out, dramatic fight to the finish, it just felt a little unnecessary to me. And I think this is one of those frustrations that people have with the NHL and with hockey in general, beyond the lack of transparency when it comes to injuries and the late local times for start times and puck drops and things of that nature. I don't know how many more steps you can add between Gabe being added to the active roster, warming up in pregame, and him actually playing. So my everything in me is saying Gabe Landeskog is going to play when the Avs line up later this week, just a couple of days from now at home for Game 3. But who knows? Because if there's anything we've seen up to this point, it's that they're going to keep us guessing, and Gabe is going to keep us guessing as long as possible, even if it means potential drama around him returning for the first time in 3 years to an NHL game in front of his home crowd. As it relates to the Denver Broncos, there is more and more mounting evidence about the fact that Sean Payton may have caught some feelings, may be a little bit smitten with one particular prospect who could serve as a game-breaker weapon for Bo Nix entering his sophomore season in the NFL. And that tight end prospect is Michigan tight end Colston Loveland. Pretty much the consensus number 2 tight end behind Penn State's standout Tyler Warren, who is not projected to make it outside of perhaps the top 10 or maybe the top 12 in the NFL draft. And the Broncos signed Evan Ingram in free agency. He's getting close to, he's basically almost on the wrong side of 30. Not necessarily a long-term option, but definitely paid well for the next couple of years to be a temporary and immediate impact version of Sean Payton's Joker role that he's been searching for since he got here to Denver. Marvin Mims, who I think played a lot of that Joker-type role by force of circumstance last year, probably relegates more to his receiver returner duties and is maybe utilized as what Cecil Lammey has coined the Riddler role, which would be the Joker who plays on the outside of the offense compared to a tight end lined up in line and at the line of scrimmage. But Colston Loveland, despite having some shoulder issues and some cleanup procedures done during this pre-draft process before the scouting combine, there are more and more national voices who are pointing toward the fact that not only is Colston Loveland a fit schematically for what Sean Payton wants to do, but that the Broncos head coach has found himself a little bit smitten with this particular player. And we've seen when Sean Payton, as a head coach, when he likes a guy, we've seen the lengths that he is willing to go to in order to acquire that player, even if it means shaking and moving up in the draft, giving up assets in the process, which is counter to the philosophy that his general manager counterpart, George Payton, traditionally likes to employ during the offseason. And we heard a quote from Daniel Jeremiah with our own Andrew Mason that we spoke of yesterday, where he just can't keep getting it out of his mind the more he observes and looks at this situation about how good of a fit it would be and the potential for the Broncos to trade up for a tight end, not just a running back. And that is something that was echoed by ESPN's mega insider Adam Schefter. When it comes to the element of trading up in the draft, he said there have been, however, a lack of teams willing to trade up, at least so far. Denver is one of those teams that has inquired about looking into trading up. The Broncos have made inquiries about moving up, and it's just a matter of finding a partner to dance with. So clearly, more and more evidence nationally and here locally about the Broncos making calls about what it would take to move up. George Payton, at a minimum, doing his due diligence on behalf of his head coach in order to see what it would take if and when the board falls away that may encourage them to do so. Daniel Jeremiah joined the Mina Kimes podcast not that long after speaking with our own Andrew Mason in an exclusive interview and was again talking about Colston Loveland. Colston Loveland and the Broncos have long been connected to having, no pun intended, a love affair. The Broncos have had, quote, a love affair with Colston Loveland. Those are strong enough words. This isn't poking around, sniffing, interest here and there, due diligence, check this, check that. When you say on the record and are essentially making a report that the Denver Broncos have a love, L-O-V-E, love affair with a particular player, that to me points toward my compass toward the truth, more so than lying season smokescreen on that one. And I know that it is still lying season, but the week of the draft, I feel like things start to point a little bit closer to center the week of the actual NFL draft. And frankly, I don't know that there's a huge negative detraction that would pull me toward not believing that this is true. Now, whether or not the love is strong enough to mortgage future assets to go get, I don't know. I'm sure that the Broncos and Sean Payton, including George Payton, love a lot of players at the top of the draft. They just don't have the capital to go get them because of where they're currently slotted to pick. So it would not surprise me at all if the Broncos did move up and do this. My gut tells me, my heart tells me that the signing of Evan Ingram, as temporary as it may be on a 2, maybe 3-year stint basis, in terms of solving or a potential solution for that Joker role, and how that doesn't necessarily build them up to secure them for the future. I think the future uncertainty at other positions, mainly defensive tackle, with 3 defensive tackles coming up for contracts after this upcoming season in 2026. I think the uncertainty at those positions and the fact that you have a body to be the Joker right now is enough to sway the decision away from mortgaging future assets to trade up, even for a guy that Sean Payton may be in love with in Colston Loveland. I also think that may dissuade them from perhaps going running back at 20 or trading up to do so. If they trade back, you never know. That opens up a whole new window of possibilities. But as much as I respect Daniel Jeremiah, and I believe the fact that Sean Payton and the Broncos by association, because as the Broncos go, as Sean Payton goes, are in love with or smitten with Colston Loveland, my gut just tells me they're not going to necessarily go aggressively at that position. If it falls to them, that's one thing, a la the Bradley Chubb. John Elway never thought he would be there, so we pass on a guy like Josh Allen in favor of Bradley Chubb. If Colston Loveland falls all the way to 20, I think that maybe that shakes up the game board a little bit. But my gut says he won't, and my gut says the Broncos are more likely to go interior defensive line at 20 than trading up into the top 15 and beyond for Colston Loveland. But good news is we only have a couple days left to find out. We are at Tuesday of draft week, which means we are just over 48 hours away from the start of the 2025 NFL draft and finding out what next key piece the Broncos will add to their roster as they continue to try to blow open the postseason contender and Super Bowl contender door that just slightly creaked open after a 10-7 season and a wild card berth in the rookie season with Bo Nix. Thank you all so much for joining me. We will be back here at the same time in the same place tomorrow. Give us a follow on all of our social media channels. Like and subscribe to our YouTube page. And we'll see you then. Let's go have a day, everybody.
I do what I love what I do. Second nature to put in the work.